Good morning and welcome. Today we're doing something a little different, something that we've never done before, because today we're actually coming to you live. Ever since Hoboken Grace went online only, we've pre-recorded our conversations because we wanted to make sure that there was a backup in case something happened on Sunday morning and our technology crashed, and you never know what's going to happen. Even today, we don't know what to expect. We showed up here, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know what you're going to hear, because as we showed up this morning, they decided that today was the day they're going to sand the hallways on our floor, and so if you hear that in the background, I apologize. You just don't know what's going to happen. And so in the past, what we've done is we've always pre-recorded the conversation and then live hosted as we've moved throughout the morning. But with the way that things have been moving, and especially with what was happening in Hoboken over the weekend as it pertains to the protest that took place here, and the context of our conversation, I felt that it was necessary for us to actually have a conversation live. And for us to be able to speak to what's happening inside of our culture, and we live in this moment where things are changing so fast, and over the past couple weeks, we've experienced something that has brought just tremendous hurt and tremendous anger, tremendous fear into the lives of so many. And so what I wanted to do today is just to take time to speak to that. And I know that last week many of you were upset because of the fact that we didn't address it in the way that you felt that we should. And I want to speak to that for a second, because I want for you to know, one, that was highly influenced by the fact that we pre-recorded that conversation early that previous week. And then also, too, and I think that this is something that's just important for you to know about Hoboken Grace and about how we operate, about me in particular, I guess I would say, because while I wanted last week to be very clear, and I think Anthony did a phenomenal job of being very clear about how God feels about racism, I also wanted to be able to take time to actually be able to pray through. Okay, God, what would you say into this moment? And one of the things that's actually very, very important to me is that we not be quick to speak. The scriptures actually say, when you look at the book of James, it says this. It says, "Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry." And as we walk through this, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't interested in having the conversation be the trend. I wanted to make sure that we took time to actually pray through and to actually engage God on, okay, God, what do you want to say into this moment? And one of the things that's always been important to me personally is to actually live out what is inside of that passage, and I never want to compromise on that. I want to make sure that no, because here's the thing, and hopefully all of us understand this. It's not my opinion. It's not Anthony's opinion. It's not any of our opinions that really matter in this moment. What matters is, okay, God, what do you have to say? And over the past 2 weeks, as I've wrestled through this, there's been a passage that God has just consistently brought me back to, that the Spirit seems to be directing me to inside of this moment. Now I do want to say this as we go into it. I just want to say, as we walk through this, I highly encourage you, and we encourage people every week to experience the chat and to join in the chat and to say hello to one another and all that goes with that. But as we walk through this, you have to understand that this is an incredibly sensitive conversation, and that this conversation is one in which there's just a lot of raw feelings. And so I just want to encourage you as we move through today, and our hosts are going to kind of try to help us to do this. But I want to encourage you to just leave the chat behind for a little bit. What I don't want is for the chat to detract from the conversation that we're having and the passage that I want to jump into together. And so I just encourage you to set that aside, and if we would, just as a family and as a community, and for all of you joining us from around the world, that we would just walk through this, together. And all of us asking this question, not okay, what is our opinion, but asking this question, okay, God, what do you want to speak into our hearts? What do you want to speak into our lives? How do you want to lead us forward in this moment? To do that, I want to take you to what is actually a very interesting story. It's shared with us by an individual named Matthew. Now, if you don't know Matthew's story, Matthew is actually one of the 12 who were the closest to Jesus. And Matthew is actually one that the Spirit chooses to speak through to give us the story of Jesus. As a matter of fact, when you come to the New Testament or the scriptures that are written after Jesus, Matthew's actually the first story that we find who gives us the account of Jesus' life, which is amazing because Matthew himself was a tax collector. He was actually despised inside of his culture until Jesus steps into his life, and in this unbelievable display of grace and unbelievable display of mercy, he takes Matthew and he brings him into one of the 12, and he becomes an apostle, one of the ones that changes the world, and one of the ones who gets to share with us the story of Jesus. And as he's sharing with us this story, there's an interesting moment that he captures that I think speaks powerfully into this moment. I want to take you to the story. It starts off and it says this. It says, "Then the mother of James and John, who are two of the other disciples, two of the other 12, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons. She knelt respectfully to ask a favor." And so two of the disciples come with their mom, which is kind of an interesting dynamic in and of itself. But then listen to how it continues. It says, "What is your request?" he asked. She replied, "In your kingdom." So Jesus says, what is it that you want? She responds back to him and says, "In your kingdom, please let my two sons sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." Wow. That's quite a request. So these two disciples who now have been traveling with Jesus for quite a long time. This is not at the beginning of the story. This is near the end of the story. Come with their mom, and their mom asks, "Okay, when you rule, I want for my sons to be number 2 and number 3. Wow. And in this moment, and there are multiple times throughout the story with the disciples where you see their understanding of the kingdom being exposed. And this is one of those moments. And you see, and we don't actually know who was driving this. We don't know if it was the mom who was driving this. We don't know if it was the sons who were driving this. What we do know is she didn't come by herself. She came with them. They're there. And you see something that is often revealed about the disciples, and that is this. At the heart of them following Jesus, what they wanted is they wanted power. And so in this moment, in this moment, they come and they just blatantly ask for it. Like when you come into power, we want power. And Jesus responds to them. Listen to what he says. He says, "But Jesus answered by saying to them, 'You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I'm about to drink?' 'Oh, yes,' they replied. 'We are able.'" So Jesus comes back and he says, "You have no idea what you're asking for. If you want to be part of what it is that I'm doing, what I'm about to step into, you have no idea what you're asking for. You can't possibly, you're not able to be part of what it is that I'm about to do." And they're like, no, we got this. We got this. And I mean, just think about this for a second. Like, how embarrassing is this? And this is one of the really interesting things about the authors of Scripture, because they don't exclude these moments. It could have been really easy. It could have been really easy to write it and just say, "You know what, we're going to make ourselves look really good." But the disciples, as they write the story, they don't make themselves look good, because they're telling an honest story of what happened. But the other thing too is they understand that they're not the hero of the story. They never have been. And so you have these two individuals. And I don't know how it worked. I don't know if it was that mom decided, "Okay, boys, come on, boys, we're going to Jesus. We're gonna ask," or if they went to their mom the way that my boys go to my youngest. I don't know why they think my youngest has the ability to get a yes when they don't. But if they really want something, they go to my youngest and they conspire together and say, "Okay, well, here's the deal. I think that mom will say yes to you, Cole. So, Cole, here's what we want for you to ask." And it's always funny, because as they send Cole to ask, they're always peering around the corner. Like, they can't wait to see. They're always spying in on the moment to see, okay, are they going to get what it is that they want? And I don't know if that's how this worked. Like, listen, John, I don't think we could ask ourselves, but you know what? Maybe he'd say yes to mom. I mean, this is an unbelievable, how embarrassing. And they come and they ask, and Jesus says, you have no idea. Which, by the way, let me just point out one other thing. It's important for you to know what happened right before this. Do you know what Jesus said right before they come to ask for power? Listen to what it says just a little bit earlier in verse 17. It says, "As Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside privately and told them what was going to happen to him. 'Listen,' he said, 'we're going to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and teachers of religious law. They will sentence him to die. Then they will hand him over to the Romans to be mocked, flogged, whipped, and crucified. But on the third day, he will be raised from the dead.'" Jesus has just walked them through what's about to happen to him, and the only thing they can think about is them. The only thing they can think about is their power. It's really an unbelievable moment. As Jesus continues the conversation with them, he says this. It says, "Jesus told them, 'You will indeed drink from my bitter cup, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. My Father has prepared those places for the ones that he has chosen.'" Now this is interesting. I don't know if Jesus is doing this, but it's really interesting to me that they come with their mom and he talks about his dad. It's really intriguing to me that he says, "Oh, no." And I think that he's pointing out a reality that that's not really for me to decide. It's one of the really beautiful things about the Father and the Son. They're constantly honoring one another, deferring to one another. You see it throughout the Scriptures. They're demonstrating this reality that love is when you defer to one another, and rather than trying to get what you can, you defer. And in this moment, he's deferring, but I don't know. It's really interesting to me that they come with their mom, and he says, "No, that's up to my dad." And he says, "No, that's not really for me to decide." As the story continues, it gets bad for James and John, because listen to what it says. It says, when the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. You think? You think? It got out. I guarantee you they did not want it to get out. But somehow it got out. And now the other disciples have discovered this conversation and they're furious. What do you mean? How come you get to be the one who sits on the right and the left? Which is also interesting. When Jesus goes to be with the Father, he sits on the right-hand side. So to sit on the left, you'd have to actually take the place of the Father. What they were asking is absurd. But in this moment, the disciples find out, and there begins to be this division. And Jesus steps into it. And he says something that should forever change the way that we look at life. He says something remarkable. Listen to what he says. He says, but Jesus called them together and said, You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and give his life as a ransom for many. He says, no. He says, guys. No. Listen. You guys, you're not getting it. He says, you don't understand. You still don't get it. And then he walks them through this, and he says, you understand something. You understand that in this world, the world clamors for power so that they can lord over others, so that they can dominate others, so that they can take, so that they can get. The world, it works on this dynamic of get whatever you can. And so the entire power dynamic is about, how do I get more? How can I take? How can I have? How can I oppress? He says, you understand that. But then he continues, and he says, but among you, it's going to be different. He says, you're not going to use power that way. He says, no, with you, you're going to use power, not for what you can get, but for what you can give. You are going to serve. You are going to, and you see him walk through this, and he says, whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. And he's not talking about actual slavery. He's talking about submission to those around you in such a way that you live your life to give instead of take. You live your life to love instead of crush. Two weeks ago, we saw this passage lived out. And we saw power being used to take. And as you watch that video and you see George Floyd, you see power being used to take, to lord over. And the reality is that this is not the exception. Our culture is filled with, and Jesus says the world operates on. But our culture is dominated by this idea of power, and this idea that you you seek power, you strive for power, and you turn on the news and you see it over and over and over again in all these different situations and circumstances where individuals are clamoring for power, not so that they can serve, not so that they can give, not so that they can love, but so that they can take, so that they can control, so that they can dominate. And Jesus says it's going to be different with you. He says the power for you is going to be about service. Unfortunately, in so many ways, the idea of power being used for service it's been driven from our culture. And Jesus says, no, for you it's going to be different. And not only in that moment did we see power being used, but here's another thing that we consistently see, because as you look at the others who are there in that moment, rather than them using their power to serve, they just cling to their power and they remain silent so that they don't lose their power. And Jesus says, no, it's not going to be that way with you. And he says to be a follower of Jesus, to be a follower of me, is to use your power to serve. And I know, and whenever we walk through a conversation like this, people will tell me, they'll say, well, but wait, Chris, what about those who claim to be followers of Jesus, who clearly use their power to dominate? Listen to me. Jesus told us very clearly that there are going to be many who come in his name. There are going to be many who take on his name. Which is why he teaches his disciples. He says, listen, you need to judge those who take on my name, who claim to represent me. You need to investigate that. And you need to look at, he calls them to look for fruit. He says, I want for you to pay attention to fruit in their lives. And he's talking about the fruit of the Spirit. He's saying, listen, you need to look at, okay, is there love? Is there joy? Is there peace? Is there patience? Is there kindness? Is there gentleness? Is there self-control? How do they interact with power? What do they want it for? What do they use it for? And he says the world, it clamors after power to control and to oppress. And those who don't have power want power so that they can do the same to others. And he's actually addressing this specifically in the lives of the disciples, because he says, you just want power so that you can rule over Rome, so that you can, and he says, no, this cycle is destroying you. And so I've come not just to teach you something different, I've come to show you something different. And so the one with all the power, goes to the cross, and he gives his life. He goes to the cross, and he allows them to take his life from him. Why? To serve. To serve you, to serve me, to serve every one of us. Just as he says in this passage, he says I didn't come for what I can get. He said, no, I came to give my life as a ransom for many. I'm not just going to teach you this. I'm going to show you this. And I'm going to show you that true life I'm going to show you the beauty of what you were created to be, and the beauty of what it is that I created isn't found when you seek power to take, but it's found when you use power to give. Not when you try to hold on to it with all that you can and clamor for it, but no. When you decide that the ultimate life is when you leverage your power to serve those around you. And he lays down his life. He lays down his life for you and for me. So that we could be rescued. So that we could be forgiven for what we've done with power. You see, in this moment, Jesus reveals something that's true of every one of us. He reveals how we feel about power, because the reality is that none of us would have done what he did. Having ultimate power, none of us would have done what he did. Because the reality is that all of us struggle with using power to take. All of us are guilty of using power to take. Of using power for what we can get instead of what we can give. And it destroys those around us. It destroys the world in which we live. And Jesus says, no, I'm going to come and I'm going to do the exact opposite. And I'm going to pay for the way that you've used power. I'm going to give my life as a ransom for you in the way that you've used power to show you a different way, to rescue you from that, to free you from that. And so he gives his life. And I want to be clear about something. It doesn't matter who you are or where you've been or what you've done. The reality is that Jesus gave his life for you. He gave his life to serve every single one of us. I wish that we were in person so that I could point around the room and say, for you and you and you. So I just want you to know this was for you. Whether the oppressed or the oppressor, he gave his life for you to free us from this system. And when he rises from the dead, the Father brings him back from the dead to show us that no, this is where true life is found. And I want for you to understand something. You can use your life that way because I have rescued you and I have made it possible for you to know that no one can take from you what I have done for you. No one can take from you the relationship that you now get to have with me. No one can take from you the reality of the eternity that you'll spend with me. And so I want for you to now, like me, I want for you to infiltrate the world, and I want for you to live with a different idea of power. I want you to demonstrate a different idea of power. And as we come together today, the reality is that our world, our culture is dominated by power that just wants to take. And when the power systems work that way, it gives the racists the unbelievable ability to use that platform to take. But with us, it's to be different. With us, it's to be different. And so as I come to you today, my question is this: How are you using your power? I think as we come to this passage and we see what Jesus not only taught, but what Jesus did, I think it calls us all to ask this question. And I'll be honest with you, I have spent hours asking this question of myself. How do you use power? Why are you seeking power? What is it that drives you as you look at this idea of power? And the reality is this. The reality is this. All of us have power in some way, shape, or form. And there's various degrees to that. But the reality is all of us have power. And I think this passage, it calls us to seriously ask this question. How is it that you're using power? How is it that we're using power? And you say, well, I don't, not me. Like I don't have any power. Yes, you do. You have power with how you treat the person that you walk past on the street. You have power of whether or not you're going to engage the conversation or shut the conversation down. You have power with whether or not you're going to use your words to be helpful and healing, or whether you're going to use them to destroy. You have power of whether or not you're going to speak up, or whether or not you're just going to cling to your power and do whatever you can to make sure that you don't lose it. You have power to be able to cross divides. You have power to build relationships. I remember, some of you heard me tell this story years ago, but it's so formational for me. I come back to it over and over again because for me this was a transformational point in my life and the way that I understood the dynamics of racism. Because when I was younger on my basketball team, I had a friend, African-American friend, and he was one of the biggest people I've ever met. He's a phenomenal basketball player. He could literally take quarters and set them on the top of the backboard. His vertical leap was unbelievable. And I remember as I got to know him and we became friends, I kept asking him to come to lunch or let's hang out after school. And we would be friends in school, but he just, no, I can't do that. No, I can't make it. No. And finally I was just like, man, come on, like let's just go. Let's go grab something to eat right now. And we left school and we went and we were sitting there at the table. And I remember, I'll never forget it. I can picture it like it was yesterday. I could tell you the entire layout of the restaurant. That's how transformational it was for me. And I remember sitting across that table and him looking at me and say, wow, this is nice. And I looked at him and I said, what did you think it was going to be like? And he looked at me and his eyes began to tear up. And he said to me, he said, to be honest with you, I thought that you were just inviting me out to lunch and that when I got there, you and a bunch of your friends were going to jump me. And I said, what do you mean? Like, we're friends. He said, yeah, but you have to understand that that's what I've been told would happen. And I've been told stories of how that's happened to my grandfather. I remember sitting at that table and weeping. It changed the whole dynamic for me. I remember when I first came to Hoboken, and I was volunteering at the Jubilee Center, and we were working with a group of 4 or 5 kids, and I was just working through tutoring and after-school stuff with them, and one of the kids, and all of the children there were African American. And one of the kids, he was talking about his dad, and then another kid started to talk about his dad. And then one of the other kids mentioned his dad, and then another kid across the table mentioned his dad as well. And then this kid, I saw his eyes light up. His eyes got super big, and he looked across the table at his friend, and he said, "Have you seen him?" And I began to cry at that table as I saw this little boy who was just so hopeful that maybe someone else had even seen his dad, because he hadn't for so long. That was the moment that shaped the beginning of what would be true mentors. But those moments and the transformational nature of them in my life, they weren't because of something that I read. They weren't because of a post on social media. It was because of a relationship. And you have the power to build those relationships. And those relationships, they didn't just change me, they changed them. It changed the way that all of us looked at the world, all of us engaged the world. You have the power to do that. You have the power to serve. You have the power to show up at True Mentors. You have the power to show up at the Open Door. You have the power to show up at Hope and Future. You have the power to show up at New City Kids. You have the power to serve. You have the power to show up at a community dinner and build a relationship. You have that power. And to serve, to understand someone who's not like you. And to understand how we can love and care for each other better. All of us, we have the power to do something. So let me ask you something. What are you going to do? Those community dinners in Hoboken, they started because someone was struggling with the divide inside of Hoboken. One of our dinner group leaders. And as she struggled through that divide, she was challenged. Do something. And you know what she did? She did something. And it made a drastic impact inside of our community. Because she did something. What will you do? And don't lie to yourself and tell yourself that you're doing something just because you're posting something. No. What are you going to do? To serve. To demonstrate what Jesus demonstrated to us. And here's the reality. Listen to me. Because here's the thing. Sometimes the grandness of the problem, can keep us, it can paralyze us from doing what needs to be done right now, right in front of us. Sometimes the fact that you see it on a national, on a global scale, you think, well, what can I do? Listen, cultures don't change from the top down. Listen to me. Cultures don't change from the top down. Study it historically. I'm telling you, cultures don't change from the top down. They change from the bottom up. They change when a community, when a group of people decides to get serious about change, and they change it inside of who they are. They change it in the way that they live. They change it in the way that they interact with one another, and that begins to spread, and that has phenomenal power. Don't allow the grandness of the moment to keep you from caring for the person in front of you, from doing what you can do. And here's the reality of it. We have the ability to be able to make an impact. Maybe not in the nation right now, but we have the ability to make an impact in our neighborhood. We have the ability to make an impact in our inside of our workspace. We have the ability to be able to make an impact inside of our city, inside of our community. We have the ability to do that if we decide that no, we're not going to interact with the power that way anymore. We're going to demonstrate the truth of what Jesus demonstrated for us, and we're going to use whatever power we have to give of our lives for those around us. And when you begin to use power that way, when a community begins to use power that way, racism doesn't have a chance. Doesn't have a chance when confronted with servant power. And so I ask you, how will you use your power? And I invite you into a conversation with God where you ask Him, okay, God, how do you want me to use whatever power I have? How do you want me to use that? And maybe you decide to run for office. Maybe you decide to build a relationship. Maybe you decide, whatever it is. It's time not just for us to know that we should use power differently. It's time for us to demonstrate it to the world and to allow the world to see the transformational nature of power when it's used to serve, to give. Will you pray with me? Father, I thank you for how you have demonstrated this to us. I thank you for the remarkable way that you not only spoke this into our lives, but you showed us this, and you showed us how it can transform. And we see these disciples who in this moment are clamoring for power, but because of how they saw what you did, they decided to use their power differently, and it transformed the entire Roman world. Because they decided to use power to serve. Father, I pray that you would use us to do the same. And I pray that as a result, racism would be crushed wherever it might be. In Jesus' name, amen.